What we wanted to do is put to the test the question of whether scientists could advocate without potentially losing credibility in the minds of their audiences. So we created a fake scientist and created a Facebook post where he says, hey, check out my interview, and provides a link. And in that little description, so about a 3-sentence blurb, he, uses each of these different levels of advocacy. So check out my interview, I'm going to discuss this recent scientific finding. Check out my interview, I'm going to discuss the risks and benefits of a range of different climate change policies. Check out this interview, I'm going to talk about the need to take action on climate change. Or check out this interview, I'm going to advocate for not just taking action, but saying we should limit emissions at coal-fired power plants and why that's going to be effective. Or alternatively, we should build more nuclear power plants and why that's going to be effective. So people saw this little blurb from this climate scientist and then rated that scientist in terms of their credibility, as well as the credibility of the scientific community more broadly. What we found is, for the most part, the scientist was seen as more credible than not, and that didn't really change even when they kind of moved up this advocacy continuum. So even when the scientist is advocating for, general action, seen as equally credible. The only case in which the scientist was seen as less credible is when he was advocating for building more nuclear power plants.
So a scientist that advocated for regulating carbon emissions from a coal plant had just as much credibility as someone who just stuck to the science.
Yes, exactly.
Stepping outside of the communication side and somebody in the physical science side, I feel like we were have been scared off of any sort of advocacy by this, this so-called is-ought divide, where you're, as a scientist, you're allowed to talk about what is, but you should never talk about what you ought to do about it.
So would a fair characterization be that scientists can advocate for certain policies and not necessarily lose credibility, but certain policies might?
Not necessarily, I think, is key right there. Yes, scientists can engage in advocacy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be successful, or that proposing or supporting a particular policy might not have some kind of downside.